You have always confused your suffering with holiness. You believed that by carrying the pain of other people, you were serving some higher purpose, maybe even reaching a deeper spiritual state. But what if I told you that your forgiveness, endlessly offered and rarely deserved, was not proof of strength, but a sign of unconscious attachment? The empath, as we call this archetype, is not created from pure light, but from emotional injury. It is the child who learned to study the emotional weather of others just to survive. It is the daughter who understood her mother's silence like a warning from fate. The son who interpreted his father's anger like sacred law. This sensitivity was not simply a blessing given at birth. It was a survival response formed in the shadows of unstable love. And so the empath grew delicate in their strength, glowing through their wounds. But this is where the danger begins. Empaths often mistake love for self-sacrifice. They hand out forgiveness like something holy, even to those who deeply damage the soul. Why? Because buried in the unconscious mind is a terrifying belief that if they stop forgiving, they will stop being loved. They fear rejection not only from others, but from the version of themselves that was shaped around pleasing everyone else. So, they forgive the narcissist, the manipulator, the betrayer. They create excuses for the mask wearer, and in the process forget that they are also wearing a mask called peace, a mask called compassion, a mask that hides the anger of the abandoned child living quietly inside. But eventually there comes a sacred breaking point, a moment of truth when the empath finally stops forgiving, when the soul, exhausted from always turning the other cheek, finally turns inward instead. This is not revenge. It is awakening. It is the doorway to individuation, the moment when the false self starts cracking apart and the authentic self begins speaking through those fractures. At that instant, masks fall away, not only the masks of others but your own as well. And what you discover in the ruins is terrifying. You see how your empathy was used against you. You see how your light was drained to feed the darkness inside other people. You finally understand the truth. You were too gentle to speak and too afraid to admit that not everyone who needed you truly deserved you. When the empath stops forgiving, they begin remembering the moments they swallowed their truth just to keep the peace. Remembering the times they apologized for wounds that were never theirs to carry, simply to maintain connection. They remember not with hatred, but with painful clarity, realizing how often they betrayed themselves in the name of harmony. And they cry not for the people who hurt them, but for the version of themselves they abandoned at the altar of approval. But this grief is sacred. It is the fire that melts the false persona and reshapes the soul into something real. Do not confuse this fire with cruelty. When you stop forgiving people who refuse to change, you are not becoming cold, you are becoming aware. You are no longer trapped inside the great illusion of projection, where the empath sees the wounded child inside the predator and believes they can love it into healing. This is not love. It is emotional entanglement disguised as compassion. It is the archetype of the martyr mixed with the fantasy of the savior. It is a pattern born from fear of abandonment and fed by unconscious guilt. But the psyche always searches for balance. And so through dream after dream, the unconscious sends messages. Wolves wearing the faces of lovers, broken clocks that bleed, houses filled with locked rooms you never enter. These are not random images. They are warnings from the deeper self, alarms from the soul telling you that your forgiveness has become a prison, that your mercy without boundaries has turned into spiritual self-destruction. When the empath finally listens to these messages, they enter the frightening world of shadow work. Here they meet the anger they buried underneath kindness, the resentment hiding beneath their smiles, the truth they feared would make them impossible to love. And this is where the transformation begins. Because by embracing the shadow, the empath takes back their power. They no longer seek validation through the eyes of others. They clearly recognize the mask of the wounded manipulator, the predator hidden behind praise, the emotional vampire hidden behind charm. And they speak not with rage, but with certainty. They say no. They say leave. They say, I finally see you. And the moment they do this, the masks collapse, because the illusion can no longer survive. The performance ends when the audience walks away. The narcissist cannot mirror what you refuse to project anymore. The manipulator cannot twist what you no longer hide. Your clarity becomes their exposure. Your honesty becomes their unraveling. The energy you once gave away through endless forgiveness returns to you in the form of boundaries. But there is grief in this too, because once the masks disappear, the fantasy dies as well. You must mourn the illusion, the version of them you once believed existed, the potential you fell in love with, the promises that never became real. You must bury the idea that your love alone could save them. And, in that burial, something unexpected happens. Your soul rises again. This is individuation. This is the path walked by mystics and seekers throughout history. It is the death of the false self and the rebirth of the inner ruler. And it does not begin with light. It begins with the refusal to abandon your own darkness any longer. I have said before, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures made only of light, but by making the darkness conscious. The empath who stops forgiving is not becoming evil. They are becoming complete. They are integrating the parts of themselves they were taught to silence. And because of this, they become powerful, not because they hurt others, but because they no longer accept being harmed. They are no longer emotionally available to people who feed on empathy while refusing accountability. They are no longer emotional fuel for the unhealed. This terrifies those who depended on their silence. But this is the price of becoming whole. To walk away from false peace. To choose inner truth instead of outer harmony. To become the mirror reflecting everything others try to hide. Let us go even deeper. In the collective unconscious, there exists an archetype known as the divine child. This child represents the authentic self, the untouched, intuitive, radiant center of the soul. For many empaths, this divine child was pushed away very early in life. In its place, the pleaser was born, the healer, the listener. These are noble masks, but they are still masks. They help survival inside the trauma cycle, but they are not the true face of the soul. When the empath stops forgiving, they begin searching for this forgotten child. They travel inward through layers of pain, betrayal, confusion, and emotional loss. They descend into the underworld of the psyche, guided not by certainty, but by longing. And there, beneath the ruins of false forgiveness, they find her, the radiant, furious, untamed self. She does not beg for acceptance. She does not make herself smaller. She remembers everything. And in her eyes, you see your original strength, the strength that never needed to be earned through pleasing others, the strength that does not depend on being seen as good. It simply exists. This moment, this reunion, is real healing. Because here you finally understand that forgiveness was never your obligation. It was your delay. It kept postponing your confrontation with truth. It kept you circling the wound instead of cleaning it. But now the wound is ready. It has remained open long enough. Your refusal to forgive the unforgivable becomes the scalpel. Your anger becomes the antiseptic. Your grief becomes the baptism, and you emerge not as the empath who endlessly absorbs pain, but as the mystic who transforms it. You no longer forgive simply to avoid conflict. You forgive only when the soul is truly ready, when the wound has fully spoken, when the truth has finally been honored, not before. This is divine timing, not emotional pressure. The psyche heals according to its own rhythm. Those who demand your forgiveness according to their schedule are not seeking healing. They are seeking control. Let them fall away. Let every mask break apart. Let silence finally reveal the truth your compassion once covered. Because when you stop forgiving what should never have been tolerated, you stop betraying the sacred part within yourself. You begin hearing again the voice of the inner God, the whisper of your ancestors, the wisdom buried in your bones. It tells you that you were never meant to become food for the shadows of other people. You were meant to bring light to your own darkness. And once you begin honoring your own light, something astonishing happens. The world rearranges itself around your new energy. What once tried to feed on your silence now trembles before your boundaries. The same people who once depended on your kindness now accuse you of cruelty. Not because you became cold, but because you no longer allow them to drink endlessly from a well they never helped refill. This is the sacred cost of awakening. To be misunderstood by those who are still asleep. Let them sleep. You are not here to protect their illusions. You are here to embody truth. And truth, although healing, is not always soft. The empath who stops forgiving becomes a mirror the world can no longer avoid. In your eyes, the liar sees his deception. In your silence, the manipulator hears the echo of his own emptiness. In your refusal to excuse the unacceptable, you force others to finally feel what you spent years absorbing for them. You no longer carry the emotional weight of everyone around you. You return it, not through revenge, but through clarity. And this clarity is sacred. It is the sword of the psyche, the blade that cuts through illusion, projection, denial, and emotional manipulation. It is the moment the soul finally says, enough. The moment the wounded child inside you rises, no longer begging for love, but demanding truth. And once that truth is spoken, even silently, your entire reality begins to change. And illusion. It is the voice inside that finally says enough is enough, not from anger, but from deep respect for yourself. And within that respect, you discover something even more meaningful than forgiveness. You discover alignment. Alignment with your deeper self, with a quiet wisdom that has always existed beneath your need to please others. The part of you that silently watched while you gave endless chances to people who never truly changed. The part of you that held tension every time you ignored your own boundaries. That inner self is no longer speaking softly. It is now loud and impossible to ignore because it remembers something you forgot for a long time. That your energy is sacred, that your body is a temple, that your presence is not something to be wasted on people who do not value it. This is what others call your transformation. But it is not really a transformation. It is a return. A return to your true nature. A return to your center. A return to the truth that existed before every mask you wore just to survive. And as you return to yourself, you begin to recognize the archetypes more clearly. The emotional vampire who survives on your emotional labor while pretending to need help. The false guide who uses your hope to gain your devotion. The eternal child who constantly asks to be saved but never takes responsibility for their own actions. You used to forgive these patterns over and over because you could see the pain behind their masks. But now you finally understand something important. Seeing someone's pain does not mean you must suffer alongside them. Compassion without wisdom becomes self-abandonment. And the empath who finally awakens makes a sacred promise, not to stop loving, but to stop leaking energy. Because pouring love endlessly into bottomless spaces is not kindness. It is martyrdom. It is the dark side of the savior complex. This is an archetype born from the wounded child who believes their value depends on how much they can heal inside others, while ignoring what still remains wounded within themselves. But you are not here to repair every broken soul. You are a light bearer, and light does not fix darkness, it reveals it. This becomes your new purpose, not to rescue, but to reflect, not to absorb, but to illuminate, not to forgive blindly, but to bless wisely. In this new understanding, you begin to forgive for the right reasons, not to hold on to the connection, but to release yourself from the chain, not to erase the pain, but to honor the lesson hidden inside it. You no longer forgive just to forget. You forgive so you can remember who you are beyond the suffering. And sometimes forgiveness is never spoken aloud. Sometimes it is simply the decision to walk away quietly, without drama, without explanation, without handing over another piece of your heart as a final gift. Because you now understand that the people who truly deserved your love never demanded your forgiveness, and the ones who constantly demanded forgiveness never truly loved you. This realization destroys every false belief you once carried. It breaks apart the lie that love means endless sacrifice, that healing requires destroying yourself, that boundaries are somehow selfish or wrong. These are false ideas, echoes from a world that praises the empath only when they are quiet, obedient, and bleeding emotionally for everyone else. But you will not bleed anymore. The bleeding already happened. It nourished the ground of your awakening. It strengthened the roots of your sovereignty. And now you bloom not despite your pain, but because of it. Every betrayal became a mirror. Every wound became a doorway. Every silence became a teacher. And in the end, the greatest forgiveness you ever offer is not to others, but to yourself. You forgive yourself for mistaking trauma for destiny, for calling emotional starvation unconditional love, for confusing projection with prophecy. You forgive yourself for the years you remained where you were not valued, for the nights you swallowed your own voice, for the smiles you used to hide your suffering. Through that self-forgiveness, something incredible happens. The masks begin to fall from your own face. You stop seeing yourself only as the empath, the fixer, the forgiver. You begin to see yourself as the sovereign soul who survived enough illusion to finally remember the truth. And the truth is simple. You never truly needed their approval. You never truly needed their love. You never truly needed everyone to understand you. What you needed was to remember that your soul was never created to carry the shadows of other people. It was created to shine, to speak honestly, to walk in truth, even when the world asks you to stay silent. And if your truth frightens people, then let it frighten them. Let every false connection disappear. Let every unearned attachment break apart. Let every mask collapse beneath the light of who you are becoming. Because the empath who stops forgiving in unhealthy ways becomes dangerous, not to people, but to every system built on guilt, control, and emotional manipulation. You become a rebel within the revolution of the soul, a messenger of the sacred word, no, a lighthouse for those still drowning in codependency. And through your presence, other people slowly begin waking up too. Not because you save them, but because you stop protecting them from the truth. Truth, when spoken with honesty and compassion, does not destroy people. It frees them. So speak your truth, even if your voice trembles, even if people walk away, even if you must stand alone for a while. Because your deeper self has waited lifetimes for this moment to finally be heard, to finally be respected, to finally be followed. When you begin obeying your soul more than the stories you were taught, the masks do not only fall from other people, they fall from life itself. You begin seeing clearly through patterns, illusions, and generational conditioning. You stop repeating the painful dance passed down through generations. You burn the old roles away and create new ones, not from fear, but from strength. Not from pain, but from freedom. This is why individuation is never comfortable. It is a path made of fire. It burns every lie you once confused for love. It destroys every apology you ever made for simply being yourself. And when the fire is finished, only truth remains. You remain. Unmasked, strong, unyielding. Not cruel, but deeply clear. This is the great paradox. The moment you stop forgiving in the way the world expects, you finally discover the true forgiveness your soul has always wanted. Not the kind of forgiveness that keeps you tied to the person who hurt you, but the kind that finally sets you free. There is an ancient wisdom that returns the moment you stop performing love for acceptance. This wisdom does not arrive through words. It arrives through symbols, dreams, and the mysterious language of the unconscious mind. The soul does not speak through perfect sentences. It speaks through images. When the empath stops using forgiveness as a survival mechanism, the psyche begins speaking louder than ever before. You begin dreaming of keys and locked doors, of bridges collapsing behind you, of mirrors reflecting flames instead of faces. These are not random dreams, they are revelations. The locked door represents the boundary you never fully claimed. The collapsing bridge represents the connection you can no longer continue. The burning mirror represents the illusion of self-sacrifice melting away into truth. Every dream becomes a message from your deeper self, a reminder that it is time to return home to yourself. The self is not your story. It is not your trauma. It is not the role you played as the understanding one, the compassionate one, the one who always stayed behind to help everyone else. The self is the eternal symbol of wholeness. It contains every polarity, love and anger, silence and sound, light and shadow. It is who you were before you learned to break yourself apart just to feel safe. It is the version of you that remembers your sacred anger and your holy discernment. You begin rebuilding your inner temple not through apologies, but through truth. Not through endless forgiveness, but through inner fire. The awakened empath becomes a guardian. You no longer open your heart to every energy that knocks on your door. You become intentional. You recognize when someone speaks from a mask and when they speak from the soul. And you no longer entertain the mask, no matter how beautiful the words may sound. You are no longer seduced by stories of suffering alone. You now understand the difference between wounds and weapons. Before, you forgave because you saw pain behind cruelty. Now you ask yourself a different question. What is that pain doing to me? This change is sacred. You are no longer a sponge absorbing the poison of others while calling it purpose. You are now a mirror. A mirror reflects truth without losing its own shape. And the truth is that many people only loved your weakness. They felt powerful when you stayed silent, useful when you stayed soft, superior when you forgave endlessly. But now your strength challenges their illusions. Your no sounds like thunder to them. Your silence feels like rejection. But that is no longer your burden to carry. It is their awakening to face. You are not cruel for becoming selective with your energy. You are not cold for leaving one-sided relationships behind. You are not broken because you no longer offer yourself as an emotional bandage for wounded people. You are simply becoming real. And in the world of what is real, everything false eventually falls apart.